Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Shin Ches Sif Lamed Ches. Today we're going to discuss, Mitzvah Hashem, some very interesting halachas, which are relevant sort of back in the day of how you would be Muslim. You sort of bring in some soil and some earth into your house and designate it for usage on Shabbos. We'll talk about that. But then what's very relevant is we'll talk about behemoths, chayes, and ophis, animals in terms of Muktzeh. Are you allowed to ever touch animals, to move animals? And what about pets in halacha? This is quite an interesting topic. Can you, if you've got a pet dog, a pet cat, can you touch them? Can you move them? So let's take a look. Says the Mishnah, says the Mechaber in Sif Lamed Ches, Shin Ches Lamed Ches. Sorry, Lamed Zayin, I think we're up to. Lamed Zayin, yeah. B'mokum de'ika p'seida. When they're in a situation of loss, mutar lahachnis mitosei etzel graf shel rei v'likboy shivos sham kadei lo yitzia. Right, so just finishing off the graf shel rei, which we spoke about yesterday. If there is something which is disgusting and that disturbs you on Shabbos, you're allowed to actually take it out. That's what we spoke about yesterday. So now we get to a situation where if there is a loss involved, you're only allowed to move the graf shel rei if you're in that room or it's you're living in that place. It's there. But what if it's in a different room? And then it's causing some sort of loss. So you're allowed to bring your bed in there to make it your bedroom. Oh, there's a graf shel rei in my bedroom, and then I can move it out. So it's like a dray, as it were, but you're allowed to do that. You're making that room into your residence so that you can move the graf shel rei. So b'mokum de'ika p'seida mutar lahachnis mitosei, a graf shel rei v'ligvoy shivos sham kadei lo yitzia. So to make your yeshiva there, so that you can take out the graf shel rei. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Mem de'ika p'seida hainu sheyav l'dei hefsed im yeshua ha-graf sham. That if the graf, whatever it is going to stay there, they'll become some sort of hefsid. For example, sheyignav sham isha kilkul adizeh, will be stolen, or there'll be some other kilkul. V'humunach b'bayis be'ezeh cheder, and it's in the house in a certain room, makom she'ein darsham, where people aren't sort of dwelling there, or is in a place where people don't walk, and therefore there's no heter to move it, because otherwise, if you are living in there, or it is in your sort of walkway, then you'd be able to move it. Like we said previously. You bring your bed in there, or you bring a table there so you can eat. And thereby, that's considered your residence. And therefore, that gives you the heter to take out the graph. Just to go in there for a second, that's not good enough. It's got to be a bit more substantial. Bring your table there, your armchair or something like that. Okay, Lamed Ches. Machnis adam mibaydiim mole kupasei offer. You're allowed to bring a whole lot of mole kupa, like a whole bag of offer of soil, or miyachid le keren zovis, and you designate it and you put it in the corner. Va'isa by kol tzarich b'Shabbos. You can use it on Shabbos. Kagoin little mimenu lachasos tzoya. For example, to cover up some sort of excrement, if a kid has made a mess on the floor, you could take the soil and just cover it up. Remember, there's back in the day they were talking about homes where there were earth floors, so you just put a bit of soil on it and it just sort of blends into your floor anyway. Similar sort of situation, Orach or spittle. But if you haven't designated it into the corner, then bottle agav afa habayis. Then it's just bottle to the soil of the floor, and then it becomes Muktzeh. You're allowed to take fruit which are sort of hidden, are covered by sand, because that is not considered Muktzeh. Okay, Lamed Ches, Siv Cotton Kuf Mem Beis, offer. So you take it, you empty out like a sack of soil into the corner and you designate it for usage on Shabbos. Little Memenu, says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Mem Gimel, u'ba'inyan she'ein ba mishum asiyas kuma. Now we're talking about a situation where you're not going to be making holes, which is a separate problem of chayresh, of bayna on Shabbos, ta'ana shitel b'shava, that it was sort of spread out evenly. Or the sand is very thin, or sort of crushed. To tekev k'shnei l'achol neifel l'soich haguma v'soisma. Kein kozbet is the shavd in the kam siman tof tzadi ches v'ayin sham mashe. So you've got to designate it in the corner and you're going to use it. Not that it's sort of spread out over the floor, because otherwise it's bottle and then it becomes part of the floor and you can't just start taking it. because that's a problem of meshava gumus and things like that. Bottle, and it becomes bottle into the ground. Even if at the time when you bring it in, your intention was to cover up soya orach, since you scatter it in the middle of your house, the midras raglaim for people to walk on. Once you spread it over the whole floor, then it becomes part of the earthenware floor, and then it's muktzeh and it's also. And therefore, if you're living in a house like they did back in the day, where there was earthen floor and soil directly on the floor, you can't just pick up the soil and use it for something, because the soil is muktzeh. And then the Machaber concluded, sorry, it was the Ramah who said, Muktzeh likach peiros hatzmunim b'chol, says the Mishnah Berurah Lamed, Kuf Mem Hey, ve'im tomen be'efer, ba'ofar shel muktzeh, and if it's, however, covered by offer, by soil, which is muktzeh, ein lekam and siman shin yud aleph, sif yud ches, mashe kosev sham. Okay, so Mr. will get there. Okay, Lametes. Also, if you're not allowed to move an animal, behema, a chaya, or an oif, however, what you can do is put a little basket in front of the chickens, so that the chicken can step up onto the basket to get into their coop or something like that. But whilst the chicken is on the frach is on the sal, then osel taltel, you can't move it. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Mem Vov, osel taltel tehem bichlal muktzeh keitzim va'avonim v'dahaloi chazu, because animals are considered muktzeh like eitzim and avonim, which is a high level of muktzeh. They're muktzeh machmas kufa, they've got no function. Dahaloi chazu, because they're not good for you can't do anything with them. Now, we'll see the contemporary aspect of this, like I said before, and we'll talk about pets and halacha in a few moments. Okay, let's just finish off the Mishnah Berurah. Even though you could come to some sort of loss by not touching them. For example, if you've got a bird which is flying over some expensive kelim, and the bird or the chicken in your yard may come and break some, cause some damage. You can't actively take the animal in your hands because the animal's a muktzeh. Even if the animal is accustomed to be in the house, i.e. it's domesticated and there isn't the problem of trapping the animal. We'll get there. To take an animal by the hands to actively move it is a problem, is muktzeh. So what do? You sort of shoo it away. That the muktzeh applies even if it involves some sort of loss. Okay, let's just finish. All right, anyway, we'll come back to the Mishnah Berurah in a second. So let's take a look at 147. So it talks about various types of animals nowadays. So says the footnote, so say for example you've got a budgie or a parrot at home, which is there just for lenoi, it's something which is nice to look at, or a plaything. Kosav harosh, that animal is muktzeh, you're not allowed to use animals. Chazal don't distinguish between different types of animals. So what about if you've got an aquarium at home? And we're talking about one which is portable. So you've got a sort of a large, fish, what was it called? A fish bowl, but like an aquarium. And you want to move it. Are you allowed to move it on Shabbos? So he says here, V'akvarium dagim kosu b'shad shuvas igros Moshe shemukzehu v'osel etalteloi. Moshe says it's muktzeh and you can't move it. Me'idach, however, the k'tzos hashulchan kosu she'afa pisha osel etalteles hadagim v'atzvam. You can't move the fish. You're allowed to move the whole aquarium because it becomes like a feature in the house. It's like an ornament. He feels that the rosh we quoted above would not be machmir here. and therefore a fish pond or a portable aquarium or something like that, you would be able to move it according to Shlomo Zalman. It's considered like an ornament. Particularly if it's a portable one where you can move it. So there you go. So an aquarium or a fish pond on Shabbos, Rav Moshe is machmir, but others are mekel if it's considered like an item, like an ornament. Okay, now, what about a guide dog? A blind dog or something like that, which is to help a blind person get around. For kelev hamyud lo leches ivrim, das hagon Shlomo Zalman Auerbach she'ena muktzeh. So a guide dog, a blind dog, whatever you call it, is not muktzeh. V'kimin she'omeid hu l'shimush shel tiltul, because that's its function. Its designated purpose is to help a blind person walk around. And then he also quotes the Shuvah of Moshe, who says, "Mutar l'suma l'leches lebeis hakneses im kalba b'Shabbos v'yontiv v'reitiles David." The Moshe and other poskim also allow a person to bring a dog into a shul. You might think it's not covered for beis hakneses, but if it's a guide dog to help the blind person, then that's considered different because that's its designated function. It's not a pagam in the covered of the shul. Interesting. Okay, now, what about if you've got a little insect on you, a kinna, a lice or something like that? So he says in the next paragraph, a little kinna or piresh me'aguf or min ha'begodim, to take it off your body or off your clothes, mavur l'shulchan aruch l'kavan and shin tezayin, shemuta, that's allowed. Chazal, who instituted Muktzeh, never included that type of situation. So to take a lice or a little flea off your clothes or off your body would be allowed. That's quoting the Prima Godim and others. Shekim shakina va'pirish muasen, because they're considered disgusting. Heim nechshavim kagraf shel rei, and it comes under the head of graf shel rei. Interestingly, for lahoitzi zvuv me'amachal, take a fly out of food. Kosav achazan ish and muta, that's also allowed. Kivin she'ein pu'ulazu nechshavim katil tzal muktzeh lektikun ha'oichel bavad. It's not considered tilta muktzeh. It's considered the tikkun of oichel. Okay, now regarding pets and Shabbos, this is quite a contentious issue. I must say over the years that I've always taught what I thought was the halacha, the traditional view that like this Mechaber is saying, that osel talta behema chayav oif, they're muktzeh, and I didn't see any heter for pets. And the traditional view is that even, and when I taught it in school, the kids who are very sort of animal-friendly kids, and they have pets at home, they got very upset about it. What do you mean? My pet dog, my pet cat is my best friend, and I want to hold it and do it. And I said, yeah, but it's the Chazal, the Mishnah Berurah says, because it's bichlal eitzim va'avonim, deholoi chozu. And they said, my dog, eitzim va'avonim, they've got no utility. It gives me comfort. So the traditional view is that animals, even if they have some utility, it needs to be very significant to remove the muktzeh machmas kufay and lo plug rabbanan. However, I've seen in recent years that there is a sort of a growing, more lenient view, and that is that animals are designated as pets may be different. And I know Rabbi Spanner is matter. He says that you can nowadays pets, you can move them and touch them. It's your pet, and that's their designated purpose, and therefore you're allowed to. So there are different views about pets on Shabbos. Huh?
Other people as well, or just the
I don't know. It seems, I'm not sure, but it seems certainly you. Because that's its designated function. It's your pet. But can other people do it? I'm not sure. Okay, let's just do 148 is also an interesting one. But we said, it's changed. It seems, and also, okay, yeah. But he said also, if it's yochel agir lehefstal yodom, so he says in 148, L'talta ba'alecham alidei nochri k'dei limno hefsid. To get a non-Jewish person to move the animal would certainly, to avoid a hefsid, would be allowed. Shemuta bedin shvus to shvus b'makom hefsid. You're getting a non-Jewish person to do a muktzeh, which is a shvus itself, but makom hefsid would be allowed. Okay, let's carry on the Mishnah Berurah. We're up to Kuf Mem Zayin. Muta lichbais. So you're allowed to take a basket and put it just outside so the chicken can step up into its coo, and it's not considered you're taking a kli out of action for the duration that the animal is on it, because at any moment you can shoo away the bird and your kli is not really doesn't become you're not mevatel kli me'echono. Kuf Mem Ches also l'talteloi, you're not allowed to actually move whilst they're on it, you can't move the basket. However, if the animal is sort of sitting there on ben hashmoshes, asa afal pisha yardu, then it becomes asa, even though the animal now gets off. To migudis gatzoyle ben hashmoshes, it's gatzoyle kula because that designates its status for the rest of Shabbos. Okay, let's just do one more. Kol behema chayav oif. So, if you've got an animal and you want to move it along in the chotzer, that means you sort of help the animal move, you hold it by its neck and you sort of shuffle it along. If the animal needs it, right? So the Mishnah Berurah says, the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain because it's mishum tzar ba'alei chaim, and therefore you want to be medaded the animal, then that would be allowed. But so long as you don't pick it up and carry it, to muktzeh hein ve'osel letaltelam, because they're muktzeh and it's osel letaltel, chutz mitar negolis. Apart from a chicken, she'ein madaded meso, you can't be madaded the chicken because it sort of brings itself up, and therefore that's considered muktzeh. You can sort of shuffle it, you can push it along from behind, that it can sort of move into a certain area. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Cotton Kuf Mem Tes. Kol behema chayav oif, bein gedolim bein ketanim, large or small animal, b'chotzer, but you can move, you can be medaded, you can sort of shuffle it along and walk it in the chotzer, but not in Rosh Hashanah. Why? To gazrin shemi yagbiem v'yavim arba amas v'yischayv chatzas. The concern is you'll move it dalad amas and you'll be chayv chatzas. To gabi behema lo amrin and chay noises atzmai. For an animal, we don't say chay noises atzmai. For a human, we do. V'ayim betur desvirle to be karmelis nami also ledades kamei b'Rosh Hashanah. That it's also in a karmelis, like a Rosh Hashanah, v'chein pasuk halavush, to look at Beis Yosef shemesadid lahakol b'zeh, who is makel in a karmelis. Umikol makom, nired about golim, gedolim, larger calves, mutal adadis b'karmelis, you are allowed to move those along in a karmelis, ayin beran shehuva Beis Yosef. Okay. Im tzrichin. When are you allowed to do this? If you need to, if the animal needs it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, importantly, on mishum tzar ba'alei chaim. For example, the animal is in distress in its current location. To im loikain, osa lasas kain, would be osa. To kol midid loichazi latiltil kashem shein metaltlin kuloi kachem metaltlin mixosoi. You can't sort of just touch parts of it. You can't move like an aver of a mace. So too over here. So the whole heta to be medaded is only mishum tzar ba'alei chaim, or if there's some other need. Even if it's not for the benefit of the animal itself, for example, you want to feed the animal or for its benefit, or even if it's for your benefit, there's a hefsed moment. For example, the animal is escaping. If it sort of moved away from its eggs, sitting on its eggs, and therefore they might become broken or stolen, but without any financial loss, then that would not be allowed because it's muktzeh, and that it's and therefore you should avoid being medaded. So just to summarize, what have we said today? We've said that a few things. Number one, we finish off a graf shel rei. The graf shel rei, you're allowed a special heter. You're allowed to move the graf shel rei. If there is b'mokum hefsed, you are allowed to make. You're allowed to move it if it's disturbing your Shabbos because it's in your room. So if it's not in your room and it's causing a hefsed, you're allowed to make that your room. Bring your chair in, your shulchan, your bed, and that becomes your room, and therefore that gives you the green light to move the graf shel rei. Then we said you can bring in some soil. Back in the day when there's soil, earthenware floors, you can bring some soil in, put it in the corner, and designate it for your use on Shabbos. So if there's a mess and you want to cover it up, you just put some soil on, that would be allowed. But anything which is spread over the ground, that's bottled to the ground, that would be muktzeh. And then we discussed animals. The Mechaber says, the Mishnah Berurah explains, because they're muktzeh machmas avonim and eitzim avonim, and therefore it's lo chozri, they have no utility, and therefore you can't move it. And generally speaking, you're allowed to move animals on Shabbos. When it comes to domestic pets, there are different views. There is a strict view that they are muktzeh as well, and there is a more lenient view which is growing, I think, namely that pets may be different because they do have that function. And then we spoke about being medada the animal. If the animal's in distress, you're allowed to sort of help shift it to move along, not to physically pick it up and move it in b'makom tzar b'nei Chaim and things like that. Say that.